we're live. And let me put in the link so people can join. All right, I don't know how long I'm going to be here. I had a meeting that was canceled tomorrow, so that freed up some time, allowing me to stay up a little later. Got some work done. So, feeling I could talk. I actually wanted to first address a little. I don't know if people are watching, but Jacob, our lovely, lovely Jacob, was having some live streams where he was discussing something called Ma'aneh Chacham. And it's basically a discussion with regards to Zionism and why there is in the Song of Songs there is a 3 oaths that are made, and Jacob's understanding of his reading of prominent rabbi, the Satmar Rebbe, whose opinion on these oaths were that ultimately the Jews are not to ascend and move to Israel and try to hasten the redemption. And Jacob, whose channel he graciously allows us to use, is in the school of thought that we, and by we I mean the collective Zionist Jews, and it's a loaded term, but for right now we'll just use a Zionists believe in. So he's not really down with that school of thought as much, and I understand. That's okay. However, I did want to respond to some of the things he was saying, and he did this very long reading, which you guys are welcome to watch. However, I'm not going to go into such length. However, I will sort of discuss a small response to what he was saying. So first off, Maimonides, his opinion, he doesn't really mention this in any of his major works. He doesn't discuss these oaths. And he himself, he advocates for the reestablishment of Jewish sovereignty. He believes, that is what would be bringing also the Messiah. So he doesn't really reference these oaths, and more so that these oaths are coming from an Agada and Midrash, so sort of from legend and interpretation. And while those carry much wisdom, I don't think one necessarily would establish law and codex and halacha, as they call it, based on that. So its position is also sort of weak from us to expect such observance to something that comes from a weaker source. Also, Maimonides does mention this a little in his letter to. There's this famous letter he wrote to this community in Yemen, but he discusses there that these are metaphorical and also not to be taken literally. Nachmanides, which is also a prominent sage, he also doesn't discuss the oaths, and he was definitely a promoter of moving to Israel and establishing sovereignty over here as well. Also, in these oaths, they talk about that the Jews shouldn't come up like a wall. And Rashi, who is a famous commenter on much of the Jewish writings, teachings, and biblical writings also says that the ascension to Israel and the establishment of the state shouldn't be seen as a singular moment, which would, let's say, be considered like a wall that this oath is talking about. Rather, there are stages to this. This happened, whether it's the Dreyfus trials all the way through Herzl's declaration and onward, Balfour Declaration and onward. So this wasn't a singular moment that happened. And I also think that it also, the oath itself uses the word that that God will have to desire until He desires that the Jews do so, till they come back. I mean, with all the miraculous circumstances that Israel has been in, definitely since the 6-Day War, I interpret that as desire. As God desiring that. Maybe that's I'm taking a lot of license, just speaking in God's name, but that's my interpretation of that. But even that, I would mention two things with my interpretation of the miraculous things that I get to experience on the daily. When God is talking to Moses, He lets him know that He never revealed Himself to Abraham the way He was revealing Himself to Moses. And He says that to Abraham, I revealed myself as El Shaddai, God Almighty. And Lance, say, good to see you over there. You're waiting for Just Chatting with Chezi and Zevi Slavin. It's going to happen. Actually, Jacob said I should do that as well, so maybe I will do that. But back to what I was saying. So God tells Moses, I revealed myself as God Almighty, as El Shaddai, to Abraham, and I'm revealing myself to you in a different way. The interpretation that our sages have, or some of the interpretations that our sages have for what that means that He revealed Himself to Abraham as El Shaddai, is I've made promises to them, to the patriarchs, to the fathers. I made promises, but they never. Some of these promises Abraham got to see kept, like having a son. However, he did not get to see all these promises fulfilled. And El Shaddai is, in a certain way, a requirement, a recognition in God as the promise maker, but not necessarily the promise keeper. Rather, that's more based on faith. And I would say after thousands of years of the reality of the prophets being denied, or the prophet's word being denied daily due to 2,000 years of exile, pogroms, anti-Semitism, there wasn't, the Jewish people on a whole never lost their faith. And while the rights and that Abraham had were awesome in the greatest sense, I think after 2,000 years of faith in the prophet's words themselves also gives us the modern day Jews also a tremendous amount of merit without our faith over the years. And if the forefathers recognize God as El Shaddai, as God Almighty, the promise maker, then I see myself and my generation, and the generations before me, of course, as the generations of the sons, who are here to fulfill that promise as a continuous promise from the fathers to us, the sons. And Israel sees itself as engaged for thousands of years to the land of Israel. And it's seemingly now some people feel like they don't want to take the next step. They don't want to marry. They don't want to allow themselves to create the trifecta of land, or triangle of land, people, land, God. And I am interested in by doing so, allowing for the Abraham and the patriarchs promise and God's promise to be fulfilled. And I believe that requires our involvement as well. I mention this often, Shuva Elai ve'ashuva elechem, like return to me and I'll return to you, but it requires an act of it requires an act from us, which is more than quote unquote just repenting. But repenting itself is a process. It's never going to be miraculous as one day all of humanity, or let's say even if you wanted to say all the Jews suddenly all repent immediately. However, the actions of a collective moving here, spending time drying out swamps, completely changing the land, which famously Mark Twain sees as nothingness, and nothing could grow over here. We turned into the fruitful land of milk and honey. It was always supposed to be. So again, that requires our work. I'll end this rant on Israel on a note. There's a discussion with regards to what would it be like if Aaron and Reuven and Boaz were aware that God or the Bible was talking about them. And it says that we know that when Aaron went to meet Moses for the first time, when they went to meet each other, in Aaron's heart he was full of love for Moses, and the sages say that if Aaron would have known, he would have come with drums, and he would have come with a lot more love. Basically, the way this passage sort of ends up, it says that there used to be. Rav Levi says, in times past, when one did a good deed, the prophet used to record it. Okay, so that's sort of what we're reading. We're reading the recordings of the prophets, Moses being the main prophets, letting us know what's going on. But now, if one does a good deed, who records it? His answer is Elijah and the King Messiah, the Holy One. Blessed be God, signing beside them, in accordance with that which is written. Then the revered God spoke one with another, and God hearkened and heard, and the book of remembrance was written before God concerning those who revere God and esteem God's name. This is in Malachi. So I read this as ultimately we don't know what the prophets will write on about us, and we don't know what God's going to write about us or think about us, but this is sort of an explanation of God in history, because hopefully our deeds, and I'm connecting this to Israel, my actions in trying to be part of the establishment of the state of Israel, not necessarily from let's say the political body that's seen today, but from the ideal that I'm trying to achieve. Hopefully Elijah, the Messiah, and God will be able to sign off on it retroactively. But that relates to Moses wanting to see God's face, and God saying, you could only see the back of me. We will only see God in history. And then this is a personal note to Jacob. So you could stand on the sidelines and let history pass you by, or you could join the sons and fulfill their father's promise, God's promise to their fathers, and believe that your actions, which will be retroactively signed off on. Hopefully that could happen. So that was the end of my little rant on the Israel Zionist front. So Jacob, if you're not seeing this now, I hope you see this later. I hope you take it with love. And to be clear, because this is Jacob's channel, I'm not promoting Zionism, or I mean, at least I am, I guess, promoting it a little, but it's personal. So, so all good aside, where's the link, Paul? I got you covered, Pastor. Yeah, there's also, if you're connecting it to the Winsome wars, Paul, we could also discuss a little of that, what's going on in Israel.
How's it going?
Pastor,
How have you been?
thank God. Doing well, keeping busy, working hard. Family's doing well, so thank God, no complaints. I mean, there are some complaints, but I keep them to myself.
Good. I've been I haven't caught everything, of course, because you can't catch everything even in this little corner. But again, your thoughts about one of the recurrent thoughts is the way religion and the political sphere align, and I continue to find your thoughts in that, and your take on the meaning crisis from your perspective to be very interesting to me, partly because it's sort of like running a parallel experiment. And I don't know if you've had any other thoughts about that since then, or
So first off, yes, I'll want to get into that. I just want to say there is, like you were saying on this little corner, there's so much content going on, which is just amazing, because like it's funny because I'm on this little app called Voxer, where there's a whole side conversation going on, right? It's like the little hidden corner, or like the mini corner, but the conversations with Vervaeke and now Vervaeke on Grail Country is just amazing. So I don't even think I feel sometimes people get despaired, like they can't watch everything. But if you watch long enough, Paul's going to mention it, or Nate's going to mention it, or Jacob's going to mention it.
Yeah.
So it is really manifesting in a beautiful way. And I think it also shifted in a certain way, like, the thinky talky. I think there's been sort of a push to, and you could see this with the Nate and Sam conversation, which is Vervaeke and Wood, you guys need to come down to our level in a certain sense, which is like, you need to explain this in a term that we're going to sort of understand. I gave a little parallel to the Talmud, which talks about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who's allegedly had to do with writing the Zohar, but he and his son go into hiding due to a decree of the Romans at the time. They're chasing them because they're learning Torah. So they immerse themselves in this cave for years, and they just study the Torah. And it says they immerse their whole body in sand. They take off their clothing so they shouldn't get ruined, and their heads are outside the sand, and they learn constantly. When they leave the cave, they say people dealing, the Jews are dealing with sort of mundane things. They're plowing their field. And Rav Shimon Bar Yochai starts burning everything around him. And the heavenly voice says, like, did you come out of your cave? Did you emerge just to destroy my world? And they go back. And after a year, they emerge again. And again, he's very distraught, but he sees this Jew running in twilight on Friday, and he's holding these two bushels of fragrance, and they say, why are you running with this? And he says, this is in the remembrance of the Sabbath, one to remember and one to keep. And Rav Shimon Bar Yochai is pleased by this, and like sort of his fury relaxes. And I gave this example too. You could have your Vervaekean terms in your little mind, or your little classroom, or your lab, but ultimately, if that's the only way you're going to be discussing things, it's going to be, I think, more destruction than building. But it needs to be recognized in a certain way in the personal. Like the individual that's running right before the Sabbath needs to understand, okay, all these terms, all these 4 Ps, how do they relate to me now doing this on the daily? So I think Sam and Nate are like the everyday, not that they're not super impressive in their own way, but in the everyday Joe in a certain way engaging with this. Having said that, putting that aside, back to the political Israel conversation. So yeah, every day really here it manifests itself. I mentioned this someplace on this channel, but so they have decided now in Israel that the national train work that is very important for Israel due to the tremendous amount of traffic we have over here, and just in general, the work that was going on the Sabbath is going to stop now, because according to religious law, only life-threatening actions should be happening. Like could you decide to, you need to save someone's life, then you could break the Sabbath. But if it's not for that, then it really shouldn't be happening. So now that's the decision, the direction the government's going. And they said, so when are we going to do this extra work we need to do? We'll do it during the week, which means the whole society, which is true that it is more traditional in a sense, but still secular. I mean, more traditional compared to, let's say, Western countries, but more secular is now everyone sort of has to be okay with the fact that there's going to be delays during the week, because on the Sabbath, we're going to do less of this work because that's a value. Now, again, that is in some sense like amazing, and in some sense you're okay, but is that like what we're supposed to do? Because we have the power plants, they're working on the Sabbath, and the rabbis had to like figure out some way how to make that okay. But you could see this is not because people sat down together and had like a deep discussion right now. Is this what Judaism represents? It's going to be, this is what the Judaism represents to the political people in power right now. And America, if it's having these kind of conversations, need to take those things into consideration. Like, what does that actually sort of look like, trying to manifest these ideologies into dogma? And it's sort of happening through the democratic process, which, again, I believe politically speaking, religiously speaking and biblically speaking, when the Israelites enter Israel, they give an option to take on a king if they'd like, sort of looking at if you look around the nations around you and you see they have a king, you could do that. When the term king over there shouldn't be interpreted specifically, literally as only king, but rather look around you and see what the other nations around you are doing. What is the political body they're using to orient themselves? If it's a monarchy, then do that. If it's dictatorship, if it's a democracy, then do that. So even here, we're seeing this tool, which I believe even democracy, if used properly, could be a divine tool. However, it could obviously be like we had with the Hasmoneans and the priests at that time. It could be corrupted. 1 second, I'm just going to let our friend Chad enter over here. Chad, hello, sir. Good to see you. I hope you're doing well.
Hi.
Good to have Friday morning nameless back, Chad. It's one of my first stops in the morning.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's good to be back. It's crazy thing happened on Sunday. I don't finish your story. I don't want to cut you off there.
Well, it's so I would end this portion, and then I would love to hear your thoughts as well, Chad. It is very nerve-wracking in a certain extent, because it is very, like, within seconds the policies were changed. So there was a whole reform in conversion, gone. And there was a whole reform in dietary restriction laws, like the kashrus laws, gone. Now, I was looking at those reforms as indications of, and I hope I could pull needle to thread over here. When I hear Sam talk about, in his beautiful new clip he did of Transfigured, talk about his sort of relationship and understanding of, let's say, being Unitarian. And then I hear Father Stephen DeYoung and talk to Jacob. And at the other hand, I see the the Israeli Jewish government deal with its reformation via policy and Jewish tradition of conversion and dietary restrictions. These are both theological. These are both religions that are trying to adapt, basically, and those adaptations ultimately, I see them bringing them closer together. Now, specifically in Israel right now, those things could quickly be like overturned, and then suddenly you literally went back like 1,000 years, because now there was like we're like, okay, we're moving towards modernity. Nope, there's a new government. We're going to go back to Judaism of like Europe or pre-Europe, and that's like a crazy shift to suddenly bring down back on sort of on a whole population, which means how do we get married right now? Is my wife that's from Russia, even though she tells me she's Jewish, her dad thinks she's Jewish, but now the government might not accept her as Jewish. So there's tremendous ramifications to this, and I don't think in any way that the ultra orthodox political leaders are doing this for malicious intent in any way. I just think that they are, sort of representing the will of God. Which, to be clear, I don't know if that's how much that's stated in the States. I mean, I know when abortion comes up, so the concept of God comes up a lot in the States. But to sort of see a member of Knesset who's dressed in traditional robes, I guess, like you don't see in Congress someone wearing like his pastor outfit and then like saying like vehemently arguing and saying like, we can't do that because like, what are you talking about? Like, we're Jews. And he's saying, but I'm coming from like a secular position. And he's like, well, I'm coming from this traditional position. And it's sort of depressing because both don't realize that they require your fusion. The political avenue, which let's say we'll say, your classic one eye, two eye move, it doesn't see how it needs to be elevated via religion, and religion doesn't see that it requires a secular vessel to allow itself to manifest itself properly or orient itself properly. So yeah, then I see ourselves as an arrowhead. So in no way better than any nation, just the point of orientation, which is trying to establish that kind of balance from the individual to the family, to the community, to the nation, and be an example. But I think we're failing right now, but maybe failing gloriously. So, but I'm sorry for that long rant.
No, it was good. It was good.
It's great.
In the U.S., if someone steps into the public square or the political arena with a non-deconstructed argument for a specific policy that overtly appeals to, let's say, a holy book, we're against abortion because God says so. We're against gay marriage because God says so. That is generally not respected. Now, you will gain an audience, but it'll be a minority audience, and so that's part of the reason, I think, for the rise of Jordan Peterson amongst conservatives, because people are used to listening to code talk or listening for code talk, and so when they saw Jordan Peterson arise, people who were interested in questions such as natural law and many of those things sort of snapped into shape. And that's part of what's made the IDW moment so potent. But it is fascinating in the case of Israel, at least to the degree that I'm understanding what you're saying, that there are all of these breakout groups that are now formally denying modernity and in a sense, I don't want to say reverting, because that gives too much of sort of a myth of progress frame on it, but in it, and it's helpful to remember that this is a very old process. I remember reading at the end of the First World War, there was a real, it looked like Islam itself, to a considerable degree, might collapse and go away with the fall of the Ottoman Empire. And of course, what you had is resurgent Islamism that, out of Saudi Arabia. I mean, in a sense, Islam shifted from the Ottomans down to the Saudis, and of course you have the Shia Sunni split, and so, but we've seen this whole renewal, and that's in very many ways parallel to what happened in the modernist fundamentalist wars in the US with respect to Protestants. The rise of Pentecostalism is one of these movements where you'll more likely see a Pentecostal just be undeconstructed and just go out and make a religious appeal, just a forthright religious appeal. So it's fascinating to me watching this in Judaism, because we're seeing this movement in all sorts of religions. You see it in the trad movement. You see it in now all the interest in orthodoxy, which, Orthodox, Jacob wants me to wear, I'm wearing black today, but there's no collar on, and people look at me and they see the big beard and they think he's Orthodox, but I'm just, wearing my beard long. So this movement is going through the world, and what you'll get in smaller places, and of course Israel is a very special case, partly because of the way the Holocaust impacted Western Christianity. So it's and the this morning some of the things, I'll hopefully get a little chance this afternoon to make a video for tomorrow, but some of the things I'm thinking about have everything to do with these questions of application. And I've listened only to parts of the video with Jordan Wood and John Vervaeke and Nate and Sam. So that's very much on my list. But I caught this talk that Vervaeke gave in the Czech Republic about democracy. And it was very interesting because John is usually studiously apolitical. John usually won't make political comment. He'll usually stick to his little realm over here of cognitive science and then play with some of us religious types because there's some overlap there. But he talks about democracy, and he doesn't do so in a partisan way in terms of Canadian politics. But democracy is in many ways, at least in the West, a direct product of Protestantism. I mean, in many ways, in Catholicism, they were dealing between the conciliar movement, which was sort of council of cardinals, versus the papacy, ultramontanism. And then Protestantism came down both feet, generally speaking, with much more Protestant ecclesiologies. And then, of course, in the United States, you have this deeply, they take some British models and really turn it into a democratic republic. So there's tons of stuff going on in this.
Chad?
Yes.
You have some thoughts?
Well, I just kind of caught part of the gist of what you were talking about. And immediately what was coming to my mind was maybe a couple months ago in Italy, they had an election, and they elected a woman who seemed very conservative, and she also seemed to me that she was very outspoken about her beliefs.
Yep.
And I just think that it's interesting. Again, I think that none of this is new in some sense, but maybe it's weird because sometimes I think when I see the world out there, like I think, wow, it seems like there's like maybe an awakening of sorts happening. I don't know. I can't tell. Is it just because I'm in this space and I talk with you guys about God and stuff? Is it just because I've plugged into that, or is there actually really some sort of a like something is heaving, and either way, it's interesting to me. So yeah, that's what's on my mind about it, because it's just like sometimes I think, well, are these kind of like last ditch effort for people to kind of see the world around them? And as you know, we've talked, or all talked about, kind of like the end of modernity. It's like maybe there's a hint of that happening. Maybe that's actually, people are actually waking up to that, and so that it calls for some sort of concern. I mean, this is really weird. It's not exactly related, but it is a little related. So I'm at church on Sunday, and my wife was tired, so she stayed home. So I went to church, and I sat in the in a different spot, because the people I normally sit by, though they are lovely, I just couldn't listen to the singing because a little. So I go and I sit in the middle of the church, amongst all the blue hairs, and they're quite lovely. And the pastor comes up and he sits in front of me. This is like right before everything, and he's talking with one of the ladies, and then he turns to me and says, "Chad, you know Jordan Peterson, don't you? You listen to Jordan Peterson." And I'm like, yeah, I listen to Jordan. He's like, "Did you hear the conversation between Jordan Peterson and John Vervaeke?" And I was like, why is this happening? Why is my pastor saying John Vervaeke to me in the church? This is really weird. Yeah, Vervaeke is great and all that. I said, but the conversation I really liked was the one with Jordan B. Cooper and John Vervaeke. And he said, that was a really interesting conversation. He said, it's really weird. A Neoplatonist and a Lutheran scholar and a Calvinist preacher are all sitting together having a conversation. And he said, the best part is it's all free. And I was just like, this is so weird that this is happening.
This wasn't a dream, was it, Chad?
No, this is a real thing. And I'm actually going to meet with him in the next hour and a half. We're actually going to have a conversation, because I hadn't told him about any of this stuff. He brought this to me, and then we had a brief conversation yesterday, and like it felt like an estuary-esque conversation. I brought up estuary with him, and so we'll see where all that goes. I don't have a lot of hopes for that taking shape with him specifically, but perhaps. But the whole point of that is like something is happening that is probably significant.
I would say this is part of the allure of Jordan Peterson, like sort of as a lightning rod, because I think I agree with you. And again, this could connect to like the end of modernity and the rise of postmodernism, but there was a lot of chaos. And I think this has to do with, you could call it 2016, you could call it like the Trump social media. We have all the world in general, due to its globalization, and definitely due to social media, it's sort of like there's a veil has been taken off our eyes, and we see, in a certain sense, like how the sausage is made, which is, wait, so this is a lie, and Gandhi was really eating, and like, so no president ever said the truth, and like, yeah, so they assassinated like JFK. What do you want? Like, come on, people are living. So like, it just, which brings on, so 1 second, maybe the world is flat, and maybe we never got, so this allowed, not having Walter Cronkite, or the concept of like someone telling me the news, which in a certain way was like their gospel, or like, so the world's gospel is like their, like the bank There's the American dream. These are the new things we could achieve if you do 1, 2, 3.
Well,
and
yeah.
that has been, disintegrating in front of us. And like every day it seems like worse. Like the Twitter wars, Elon Musk, he's buying it. He's going to show them that the bots, we don't trust the bots. Now we have this, like everyone is talking about AI. Now we have this new chat GPT thing where everyone's like terrified from and just like, neurotically laughing at as they try to feed it more information. So I think, and this relates to Sam's conversation that he had just recently with someone, where he was talking to him about religion, and the professor or doctor he was talking to said, like, Sam asked him, what do we do now? And he says, like, we have to live in a certain way where you have to go back to the text, try to live in a more biblical way in a certain sense, like try to use those stories and patterns to reinvigorate or give sense of meaning to our life right now. And this is, to me, the rise of this little corner, because Jordan Peterson, for a lot of people, was like so much noise, and suddenly there was a signal, and there was like, whoa, okay, he seems to be like restacking things in order again. Like, no, this term means this, and that, and everyone sort of had to learn. When you're living in a world today where in the dictionary today you have the term literally also means figuratively, so like it's crazy. So you need like a Jordan Peterson to be like, listen, and that's like the only thing that's saving him, because you see how crazy it is that in Canada they're coming and saying, like, we're going to take away your license. He's like, guys, you understand? You guys all got your doctorates by quoting like my work, because I'm like the most cited man in the world, basically. So like it's in this corner, we are exploring those conversations again. And that relates all the way back to Sam and Nate trying to say, okay, so we're talking about these terms and we're reviving Neoplatonism, and mysticism is amazing. But can we try to now understand like what these terms actually mean? Can we try to say, like, what does this mean? What does transfigured mean? What does Unitarian mean? What does the Father mean? So seemingly we are interested in the original text. We know, and like I said in the past, like Sam Harris lost. The Talmud says one who doesn't believe in idol worship is considered a Jew. And by that it means like once you are basically like an atheist, you're halfway of just becoming like a monotheist, because like you realize the nonsense. So I think the nonsense is gone. Like, Sam, you don't have to worry. Like, we're done with that version, but we're not done with the actual, concept of religion and God. And I think we need to go back to those words, and people are not going to like this. And I know Mark is definitely not going to like this, but hence I see some power in postmodernism, or we'll call it postmodernism light, because when we are completely destroying the meta narratives and the concepts of words, in a certain sense, that brings us to the nothingness, or like in Kabbalah, it's called the Ein Sof. And in a certain way, that allows us to rebuild again. It allows us to, if we don't abandon things completely, we could, with that freedom of not necessarily sticking to the concept of this term, realize the flexibility we have in these terms and potentially allow us to reinterpret. But I'll end on that because that was a long rant.
Well, I see this a lot, in the recovery world, where like I think all of this is kind of like, for a very long time, maybe few decades, or maybe even 100 years or so, things have probably been so good where you kind of, it's easy to kind of not pay attention, and it's easy to kind of like just be inside of like the stability and have faith in how stable things are, and like, but then after a while, it's like there's like this nagging sense that there's something not right about this. And I guess I'm talking about this like on a very general cultural level. And so like all it really takes is, well, I think a lot of people in this space had a Jordan Peterson come over and push over the first domino. And so in some sense, we're kind of like the kind of the first people to experience this Jordan Peterson thing. Now it's kind of getting bigger and bigger, but then so like, he pushes over this domino, and then all of a sudden somebody like, Donald Trump comes along and pushes over a domino. And then you have something like COVID come along and push over the next domino. And the stability of everything is just kind of like, it's not working. And meanwhile, it's like we can't really lie to ourselves. And the analogy that comes to my mind is in the literature for Alcoholics Anonymous, it talks about somebody who is in their sobriety, and they're just going along saying, "Oh, I'm doing good, feel great, work better, live better, feeling awesome." And he's like the boy whistling in the dark. And he would give anything to be able to take a couple drinks and get away with it, right? And then, the day comes where he can't whistle in the dark anymore. It just kind of like the bridge just crumbles. And like you're saying, that this bottom happens where that's where I really believe that. Like that's where a rebuilding can happen, because clearly we have difficulty having a similar language that we can relate to. So we can't agree on what is evil and what is good. And so and now we'll be able to, I think it'll be, in some sense, you kind of have no other options but to work with what we have. I'm not trying to talk like super apocalyptic or anything. I'm really not. I'm just kind of talking out of my ass, but I do it pretty well. So with that, I will pass.
Well, your point, Chad, about the little parable of the alcoholic who's whistling in the dark, that's contrasted by the alcoholic who is working the program, because merely maintaining sobriety is not actually the goal.
Right.
And you see this in religious contexts. You can be, if you have a list of sins you're looking to avoid, especially if you keep the list fairly short and keep the list fairly behavioral, you might be able to manage that. But there are always sins under the sin, such as self-righteousness. And you've managed to avoid doing all these things, but you are cultivating in yourself a kind of character that is anything but God's design for a human being. And what's you see these patterns in different spaces. I love to keep an eye on the recovery communities, because I do find there's so much wisdom in them, but there's also the same kind of games that get played in church get played in recovery communities. It's amazing to watch it, even though in recovery communities there's a huge amount of wisdom, and there's just a stark beauty. There can be a stark beauty in recovery communities, because the transformations can be so stark, partly because the ravages of addiction can be so dramatic. So no, that's true. But then getting back to sort of the where we started this, part of what happens, Plato, since we'll be going to be doing a lot of talk about Plato and Socrates for the next while because of John's project, but Plato with his the idea behind the Republic, which it says, well, we want to know. I got this part of this from Dallas Willard. We sort of want to know what makes a person righteous. And so I'll be in Matthew 5 this week. And so the Beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount, is this question about righteousness, dikaiosune. Okay. So, and righteousness, I often tell my people in my church, righteousness is sort of the thing inside of you that makes you a righteous person who does right things. The corrupt cop and the righteous cop can look the same on the outside. They drive the same car. They wear the same uniform, but there's something inside the righteous cop that makes the righteous cop not take the bribe and enforce the law wisely and can be trusted in the community and bring shalom and justice and all these good things to the community. That's what the righteous cop does. The corrupt cop takes the bribe, undercuts justice. Nobody can really trust them. And so then the question in Plato's Republic is, well, what makes one and not the other inside of a person? And they're wrestling with it for a while, and then Socrates says, well, let's look at a city and let's ask the question, well, what would make the city just? And in a sense, it's a question, what is the righteous spirit that inhabits the just city? And so he blows it up to the city size. And in a sense, what I see happening, Chezi, in Israel is, okay, so we have the law of the Sabbath. What now, if we follow the law of the Sabbath with respect to rail infrastructure and with respect to all of this technology that obviously wasn't there in the early Iron Age. Yeah, wasn't there in the time of Moses. How do we apply that reality of righteousness to our need to construct a rail system, which is something which we're doing for the welfare and well-being of rich and poor alike in a nation. And so then what happens with the body large is related what happens with the body small, and you'll see that in an AA group. I have no doubt that there are certain groups that are just really wonderful and certain groups that are just kind of not so good. And probably the difference is the recovery groups that really are special are groups that probably have 2 or 3 recovering alcoholics that are, in a sense, saints. They work the program, and they do it in such a way that's hard to describe, but they do it in such a way that makes the people next to them better. And not just not drinking, but actually living out the kind of life that the 12 steps are pointing to. So, and these things scale. And so, Chezi, I really appreciate your wrestling with this question, because I've been reading this book by Paul Johnson. I'm kind of waiting for Jacob to pop off, and either because Jacob doesn't usually come in the middle somewhere. It's usually completely for it or completely against it. So, but I'm reading this History of the Jews by Paul Johnson, which I picked it up a couple of years ago because it's like, I don't know anything about the Jews, through most of their history. And, even if it's a terrible history, for someone who knows so little, it's at least opening my eyes to some things. Well, I'd love to hear what you have to say
about the Jews. They're a nice bunch.
No, I don't know if you know anything about that book.
I don't know about that. I don't know about the book. I just finished reading the book called Jesus the Pharisee, the Pharisees. So that was like an interesting book, just about this whole crazy theory about the Essenes and Jesus and Paul and their connection to the Hillelian school of thought. Fascinating. But that's sort of what Sam was alluding to in his new video, which was how much of, let's say, because you're talking about the Jews, how much of the historical Jesus, or for that matter, how much of the historical, biblical story. Now, I know you might not like the term historical, or you might want to use a different term, like. But
if we understand what we mean by it, and
so how much of that, and this again due to this generation and reality we live in of information, and like even like a channel like this, like when a channel like this is out, what do you want? Like, what do we want the churches or the synagogues to take out of this? Like, are we asking, like, let's take it all the way back to Chad's interaction in church today, right? So you have like, you're like, what this pastor just talked to me about? Like now, so here you see it made its way inside, so to say. The snake made itself inside the garden. Okay, like you're inside right now, and you're almost taken aback, right? I'm sure there's a part of it that's like exciting, but you're almost like, what is like, where is this coming from right now? Is there a place for that in church? Are we really asking people to re-examine and wrestle with their religion? So it's almost like back to Israel. And I mentioned this before, Paul, this, like, you have your hands on the reins right now, right? Like you turn yourself into like a mini superpower. And this is my discussion with Jacob, because Jacob is, I'm a rabid Zionist. We have no reason to be over here right now. And my
did he fire you too?
All right, I'm fired as well. I'm just getting like, I'm just on my
Chad's church is going to be burned. You're a rabid Zionist. I, of course, am multiply fired and a horrible Protestant.
It's Jacob against the world, but my point to him is, if I want to see myself, I was saying that I started this live stream saying, Abraham, God tells Moses that I only introduce myself to Abraham in the name of El Shaddai, and I'm introducing myself to you in a different name. And the commentary says about that Abraham recognized God as the God that makes promises. However, he doesn't get to see all those promises fulfilled. There's a lot of faith built into that.
Right.
And I'm saying, if the patriarch's relationship with God was via the promises he made, I see myself as the sons returning and fulfilling those promises.
Right.
However, that requires me to wrestle and look at my history and see if I'm comfortable with saying God is, quote unquote, signing off at this. Am I still recognizing, relating to, Moses looking at God's back? Am I still recognizing God's back over here? And that's sort of like, can that be done in church? Can that be done in a mosque, where we're saying like, okay, it's sort of back to the baby and bathwater. So even if you don't want Sam to be throwing out that baby, it's going to be this pastor that's coming to Chad right now and saying like, do you know about the John Vervaeke dude? And you could be like, buddy, I don't know if you know how deep the rabbit hole goes. You know what I mean? Like,
I don't know if you know how deep I'm in the rabbit hole, Chad says to his pastor.
So like you just said, Paul, like, is this a dream? And have we entered that dream state, which is like, we talk about on-ramping and off-ramping. Like, how does the church get on-ramped? And how does then it find its way to off-ramp itself?
Yeah. And the, in some ways, Chezi, your question about Israel, I mean, I have that in terms of a church. So I'm the pastor of a little church, but I wrestle with, I'm always wrestling with the question of, okay, how, what does Christ look like in me? What does Christ look like in my church? What would Christ have me do that he would be more glorified and more present in my church than he is right now? And so the fact that we found some very surprising voices helpful, Jordan Peterson, John Vervaeke, who have interesting relationships with all this stuff, but it's part of the journey. And here we are talking with a rabid Zionist, and Chad, who doesn't wear his mask to church. But what would really be funny is if you're talking and your pastor says, yeah, there's these other little sites that are having conversations, and there's this guy, he wears this lucha libre mask. And I imagine Chad thinking, now I'm a superhero, I've got a dual identity, and Sunday I'm just Chad the parishioner, and on the YouTube I'm Chad the alcoholic, the masked recovery crusader.
Well, Paul, this is sorry, Chad, I was talking a lot. Do you want to say something? Or
no? So,
Paul, and this is too personal. You could tell me to buzz off, but um, how much of your involvement then here is due to the fact that, like, listen, Chezi, it's a small church and I'm doing my thing. And like, to be honest with you, like if I was Paul Vanderklee from 20 years ago, while maybe I was reading these books on my own, I don't know if I would be able to be having this conversation, or I don't know if I was ready to have this conversation, or better yet, like, I don't know if my church or even my family would be ready for me to be having, let's say, this kind of conversation. Like, how much of this do you see in yourself as, let's say, growth, or how much of this is like new exploration? I guess I understand. Like, I do feel like, I guess those could be the two things. Like, do you think like it's possible for Chad's pastor to pull something like this off, or it's going to be like he's going to have like many stars aligned to be able to speak as freely as I am?
Well, I got a great comment on my rough draft last week by somebody that basically said, "Yeah, I listened to your rough drafts, and they're not like your other stuff." And I understand that, because in some ways I see what I do during the week here in this little corner is very much in alignment with my church. And this Sunday had a lovely young couple come and visit the church, and of course I go up to them and I introduce myself, and they of course know who I am because they've been watching my videos, because they're Jordan Peterson fans, yada yada yada. But most of the people in my church are completely disconnected from this. It comes together in me, but the only reason I could do this is because my church is so small. If I were pastoring a church of 150 or 300 or 500 people, I could not do this. In fact, I'll probably have to get off this in a few minutes, because I have a security camera up there now that Rick helped set up, and I saw a guy walk in, and I'm going to have to talk to him in a few minutes. And, but the church is very small, and the church is dying. And so I do wonder, in fact, I'm still thinking about pulling the trigger on a new aspect of my channel that, that part of it will be because I'm thinking about, if in...
You're talking about the monetary aspect of it.
Yeah. Because, I'm thinking I'm about 7 years away from being able to, pull to receive my pension. And I'm thinking, can the church go 7 years? But then the other question is, well, if I left this church, would I have to choose between my next church and what I've been spending a lot of my time doing with all of you? That would quite likely be the case. And I wrestle with that, because I do see all of this as probably some of the most vital, interesting, successful ministry that I've ever had in my life. And so to shutter all of this in order to work in, a lovely local congregation someplace, I don't see that as sinful. But who else would sort of be able to fit into my shoes in this role right now? And that doesn't mean I'm essential or anything like that, or I can do this forever. But so no, your questions are tremendous. And actually, part of what I've been reading in that book too was the some of the in the Middle Ages, Jewry in the Middle Ages, with respect to the debate about studying the book or working in the world. I mean, there's a section about that, and I just found that tremendously fascinating, because the Anglican pastor who pastors the little Nigerian Anglican church that rents from us, he has a day job. His wife has a day job. I mean, most Protestant clergy are bivocational because their churches are too small to support them. And I'm rather uniquely blessed, because I'm in a tradition with strong support for professional and full-time pastors, and at least at this point, the church has been able to continue to pay me. So, and the church has also embraced what I do online, even though they're terribly vague and fuzzy about it. But when they see like a lovely young couple come in on Sunday morning and how on earth did you get here? Well, I've seen Paul on YouTube. And the church leadership is like, keep it up, pastor. Visitors are coming because you're on YouTube.
This reminds me of this scene. I don't know if you've seen this movie, but Sister Act with Whoopi Goldberg.
Yeah.
But she has like this whole rap version of the song, and like these people come off the streets, and like the Archbishop tells like I don't know, someone in charge over there who's not happy with this. She's like, can't you see like sort of what this is bringing in a certain sense? And ultimately this is a different type of music, but one that and it could require like a generation. You know, it requires Luke's kids and Mark's kids and Chad's kids, and it requires them to sort of grow up in a house which is already sort of embodied with this. And then that congregation sort of is expecting a quote unquote Paul. And so, you know, like it's also, we need to also be happy with our current lot. We have to realize that like these things, even though we're living in a pace where things are moving so quickly, like processes like these take time. Even the development of this channel for, let's say, a religious and a theological conversation, arguably you would say things are going here in like the speed of light with the amount of like conversations people are having, then like commentary on commentary of conversations, because it's seemingly there's a sense of urgency. People are saying like, I want to push through. I want to learn more. And doctors, lawyers, fathers, mothers, all people are putting in the time and work and watching these videos to better understand. You know, like Sherry's writing these poems while watching these things, trying to really like, wait, so what do these words actually mean? So I think it is going to take time, but seemingly there's like a natural response to this.
Yeah.
I'm really looking forward to Paul Vanderklay's post-pastoral book. And
There and Back Again.
Yeah. An unusually tall hobbit's tale.
Well,
You can, if you search Paul Vanderklay Hobbit and Christian Reformed Church, you'll find an article I wrote a number of years ago on the internet about this, but that was before any of this stuff happened. It is out there.
But it'd be nice to see kind of like, I know I'm always kind of prodding you about writing something at some point, but it'd be cool to see you open up about things that maybe you can't or won't at this point. And
some people would have to die before some stories can be told.
I get that.
I don't mean that as a threat. I mean,
I get it.
I tell a bunch of the ladies in my church that, you know, because they all know when my father died, or when my father retired, he wrote a book, and it's just full of stories from Patterson, and a lot of the stories he couldn't write because they're personal stories. But I tell the ladies in the church, it says, you know, you're going to have 2 chapters, because some of them deserve 2 chapters, but they're still alive, so can't really tell the story yet.
Paul, there's, and I don't want to keep you, of course. There's something you mentioned just about reading that book, saying that, you know, in the history about Jews learning the Torah or working. And originally, one was not allowed to write down the oral Torah, and that was flipped on its head. And then one was not allowed to learn Torah for any money, and reality forced a change. Yeah. And then there was a reality where one should not teach Torah to a female, and that was changed. And the last transition that needs to be happening is one is not to teach Torah to a Gentile. And that also, and I think Jacob and many others are doing the exact opposite, but rightfully so, because ultimately, and I know this connects, like, this both connects to doing pastoral work and actual like work and teaching the Gentile the Torah, because in this world there, you know, we're trying to find unity and unison, and we're trying to speak a single language, and it's not going to happen if it's just speaking the divine language or just speaking the secular language. It's to recognize the holy sparks in all these things, even whether it's secular. It's to recognize God's image in yourself, and then realizing that's clearly then in the other person in front of me. So really making those connections. I really like understanding why it would be okay to also work relates back to that story I said about him coming out of the cave and burning everyone. It's not realizing the proper integration. And sometimes we could be standing on our podium and thinking that because we understand this in a certain way cognitively, we now, we have this truth, which its result could be now we're stopping the trains on the Sabbath because that's our interpretation. So there's real life implications for better or worse. It could completely change a community or it could devastate a nation.
Yep. No, well said. Well said. So that's probably a good place to loop around. You kind of close the loop on the story, starting with the trains, and nicely done. Nicely done.
It was
Good
always
homiletics.
a pleasure, Pastor Paul, and thank you for blessing us with your presence. Most appreciated.
Yeah, thank
Always
you.
good to be here.
I gotta run.
All right, we'll see you guys.
Good night. All right, that was fantastic. I know I didn't look at comments. I'm sorry. I'm not the best in that. Okay, Lance wants a conversation with Zevi. Hopefully that's going to happen. Mark from Navigating Patterns. Remember to navigate your way towards his channel. Bad timing for me, but I had a great stream, guys. Mark had a great conversation recently also, and there was a big party there. Jonathan talks to us about watch a talk given by Yanuka. Okay, so Jacob is a very big fan of the Yanuka, a prodigy, I think also a musical prodigy and a Torah prodigy, which some people have regarded him as a potentiality of the Messiah. When I say some, I mean far and few between, or in some specific sects of Judaism. So what do I think of him? I think he's an interesting phenomenon, obviously. Seemingly he's managing to integrate a tremendous amount of Torah knowledge and wisdom and sound coherent when doing so. So it is a good phenomenon. The fact that he likes music is really the most interesting thing, because that's a little more out of the box, and I don't know, something about it seems to me more real, but I don't know. I can't take it seriously as a messianic candidate, because if he is, then he is, and if he's not, then he's not. Like, it will manifest itself, but I don't really think about it too much. So that would be my answer. Okay. Lance says, Paul's coming. Yosef says, must resist jumping in. It's too bad we didn't get you in. You were being called upon, my friend. All right. We have over here Lance. I figure I'd leave it to my Jewish brothers and Paul to have an interesting conversation. Lance, you're also always welcome. However, I know you're very busy at work because you're a fantastic lawyer and you take your clients and works seriously. What's going on over here? Okay, Lance is telling me if you haven't spent time wrestling with those concepts, the video would be like Chinese to me. 2 years ago, I had clicked out of it in about 10 seconds. I hear that a lot of thinky-talky. Hopefully, everyone's doing a good job here together to try to use terms that many of us will have an easier time understanding and then integrating. This is the same conversation. Is halacha going to burn? Halacha, the Jewish code, Jewish law, is it going to burn the world, or can it be manifested and embodied in a way that expresses our love for God and our fellow man? Please, God, we will all get embody that wisdom and know how to create such a balance. Yosef, I feel like I'm always crashing Chezi's Paul chats. You don't realize that you're always being called upon. You're being invited. Okay, the IDW fell because there's no natural law and modernity depends on it. All right, I hear you. agreed. Democracy is a child of Protestantism. Yeah, we discussed that. In the Talmud, there's also, and in Jewish law in general, it's majority rule in general. So there's, obviously indications there for democracy or roots of democracy. Father Eric was here. It's good to see you, Father. I hope all's well with you and your congregation and your 500 children. Not his specific children, but I mean, they're all his children because we're all children of God. But in his congregation, apparently, this is a tremendous amount of children. All right. What else do we have over here? A little more Lance. The Runaway Rascals talks about becoming more human. Sacrificing the body for the life of the spirit. Okay. I'm not exactly sure what that relates to, but I'm liking it. All right, we have Jordan over here. Righteousness is for palace, holiness is for the temple. Okay. All right. It talks about what's righteousness, different aspects of that. If there's no place for justice, this is only a world where justice can have meaning. Well, just as far Abraham is symbolized with righteousness, and throughout his different tests that he had, his trials, Isaac was the real test of justice. And would someone righteous be able to handle that? That's why it was a specifically difficult test for the man who embodies righteousness to deal with a sacrifice of his own son. I'm not getting into, what that means metaphorically, just in general, throwing it out there. It's for a different conversation. We're talking about a form of separation of church and state. There's some of that. Justice and the law to manifest that are only given after Eden. Yes, obviously, Yosef is aware that there is some commentary that talks about, the Torah being existing before the whole world was created. But obviously, if there's any truth to that I think it means a different Torah than, let's say, the legal system we're talking about. So the law was the law before it was given to Moses. So that relates to sort of what I was saying earlier. Moses experienced revelation, not just the covenant. There's something there. We agree Torah is eternal. This is a little introspective corner of the internet. Okay, I'll accept that name as well. Zach feels like Simon the Zealot. Lance wants to talk to someone on BOA. He wants to talk to Ivan. You guys should definitely have that conversation. Jay Harris, is Chezi a zealot? I think not, but I guess it depends on your interpretation of that term. Hello, Laura. It's nice to meet you. Hopefully one day you could join this Just Chatting stream as well. Okay. Can't swallow the whole sea at once. Share rate phone, Apple gifts, same diff, right? You guys, a lot of comments. All right. It ends with, let's hope Chezi doesn't get too far into the comments. Boom. Done. Finish those comments, brother. I don't know. People get upset that you don't see the comments. I want everyone to feel like they're participating. You're all here. You're all welcome. This is all happening because you guys are all over here. So feel seen and feel loved. Who I really missed over here was Luke. That's who I was missing. Not seeing his name in the comments. It breaks my heart. It also breaks my heart not seeing Jacob over here. Specifically, Jacob, because the first 10 minutes of this live stream is dedicated more specifically to you. All right, so I think I'm going to bust off. unless someone has something specific they want to jump on or share, I'll be glad to stay on for another minute or two. Chad, thank you for joining the conversation. It's always a pleasure talking to you, my friend. Jess. First of all, hello, Jess. Second of all, just reminding again, Jess has this awesome new channel. It's doing awesome music, holy, divine music, or divinely inspired music. I guess maybe later on in life we'll know that it was divine, but right now it's divinely inspired. So definitely recommend it to check it out. But Jess, I hope you're doing well, buddy. You know, people want in this corner, people talk about the whole little corner is to affirm Luke, who then affirms us in return. It's cyclical. So people talk about how they want to, talk more in the personal. I'm trying to think how I could have a conversation about my work process and how maybe some of that embodies some of the things I believe in, but I'm still sort of thinking about it. So that would help in making this a more personal conversation, but I still need to make it sound coherent. So I'm sort of thinking about that. But I think I'm going to connect it to, the need for honesty and transparency, but I think that really derives from honesty. We have a pretty extreme. I don't want an extreme intense process in my firm, and I almost believe in it religiously, sort of state. I take it very seriously. But some of that could be just due to my character traits, or I don't know if they're. I'm sure many of them are flawed. I don't know if the ones I'm specifically speaking about are good or not, but I am trying in a certain way to manifest a very truthful and honest process through and through. Really from the moment I meet the clients, through the vendors, really till completion. And there are difficulties with that. There's difficulties with that, with how and when you want to bring up, sort of when you need to sort of check your baseline and bring yourself and the client into reality to make sure you're aligned and then you're understanding truth or the reality in the same way. If you're experiencing things the same way, and that has ramifications. That has ramifications to sort of how you want to approach the client, how you want to approach the client with regards to to obviously very delicate elements like monetary decisions. So I guess the conversation is not fully cooked yet, but I guess that'd be a personal way of having this discussion, being more personal about my process. I don't know if that sounds interesting to people, so maybe I won't have that conversation. Get a comment over here. I'm in contracting, and it was easy to see how people would slip into dishonesty. So totally. So it starts, from we definitely have a no commission, no percentage, no kickback policy, but it's crazy how A, no one believes you when you say that. B, vendors or suppliers that you constantly explain to them that you don't work through that system have a very hard time even understanding what you're saying. Like they sort of hear me, and then like the next time we meet, they're like, but I'm keeping like 10% on the side. And you're like, you explain to them that that's not how it's going to work. And there's a built-in thing like, how are you not also though, like in a certain way thinking about yourself? And yes, there's a business, and I mean, I don't have shareholders, but like, I mean, besides myself, but like, I'm not. I understand that a business entity has its obligations towards its shareholders, but I mean, I ultimately see myself as someone that is here to, aside from a service provider, I'm here to assist them in this process, and we really try to have like a zero ego attitude, which I guess makes that easier. But yes, you could definitely slip into dishonesty. And many times it's not from a malicious place. People have a hard time saying they don't know, or they bit off more than they can chew. And when you don't do that and you decide to dig yourself into a deeper hole, and that doesn't mean you shouldn't jump in sometimes into the deep end and start treading water and teach yourself how to swim. However, you need to realize, it's more fun in the deep end, but that's also very dangerous. And if people feel like they're drowning, they are going to cling to anything to allow them to survive, many times to their own detriment. Just wishes he could jump on, but he's swamped, allegedly. Have you followed along with the Neoplatonism project Debbie has been doing in conjunction with VVK and other channels? So yes. Yes, I've been talking to Zevi before when he was thinking about doing this conjunction, this joint venture, and yes, so I've been following it behind the scenes and here together with all of you. I haven't watched everything yet, but I'm fairly up to date. It's fascinating, obviously. Zevi, in general, is really he's got a whole new space that my little part in trying to assist him to do right now, but really to create a place where there could be a strengthening of his channel, really bring in other voices as well. So hopefully it'll be a fascinating venture and allow for a growth of his channel as well. So I think we're going to still see very interesting and great things coming out of that space. So definitely keep your eye open on Seekers of Unity. It's really about establishing trust. It is, however, trust once established, needs to be maintained. It's allowing a client to feel trust or delight is, in today's world of instant gratification as well, and things like Pinterest, and Instagram, which manipulate reality and standards in a certain extent, and expectations, where it's more than just establishing it's a trust. It's real hard work, and I think it's worth it. But it's hard work. Have you promoted our live stream Fringe Encounter? Promoted it? You mean where here? First of all, I'll gladly promote it over here. Grim Grizz, I don't know if he has a title called a wizard yet, but something about him reminds me of a wizard. We had I think, an interesting conversation. We were trying to get him canceled, I think, also. So feel free to comment and say that there's a lot of anti-Semitism there. I was completely appalled by his conversation. No, it was a great conversation, as always with the conversations with Grimm. So you guys should definitely check it out on his channel. Pinterest and Instagram, them ladies' social networks. Yes, however, many of my clients come in pairs, and the ladies, in many aspects of our life and society, and as Jordan Peterson told Kathy Newman, they're the consumers, they run the market. So we have to take them into consideration, I think. How much is Peterson moving down the path of embodiment of soccer? How are they similar? That's a longer conversation that I could get into right now, Chad. I'm sorry. Just warn them about the Instagram yachts, for sure. Yeah, it really is horrible. I mean, the religious communities in general and the Jewish community specifically have been protected from some of this due to their distrust of technology and social media. But, it's everywhere, really. And they keep on creating themselves, one-upping themselves, keeping up with the Jones, with the Goldbergs, is unattainable. So much so that there's a huge issue with schooling in the States because, just to put things in perspective, a private Jewish day school, I think at high school, you're already talking about over $40,000 a year. And that's just a crazy amount of money. With the summer camps, which are $10,000 per kid. So, and religious communities and Jews specifically have many kids. So you have an average of 5 kids. That's crazy money. And salaries don't pay as much anymore in some industries. So yeah. So, keeping up with the Goldbergs and creating this insane lifestyle that American Jewry specifically created for itself in North America is, I think, it's doomed. They have charter schools. Peterson is Geppetto, still as far as I can tell. He's Geppetto. Are we all trying to save him from the belly of the beast? From the belly of the whale, swimming out to the depths to save him? That's enough for me to set up a paintball for Jesus summer camp, but the marketing would be really hard. I hear that. Oh, I love paintball. It's been so many years since I played. What an exhilarating game. Yeah, so crazy money. And these camps, having them, they have, they create themselves lakes, paddleboarding, private pools, basketball, rock climbing, paintball. It's really nuts. The cabins today all have AC. I would never send my kid to a camp like this just because I just think it's nuts. I was there when I was much younger as a counselor, which was also a very strange experience for me. I see myself relatively as an Anglo-Israeli, and my parents are from the States, and I absorbed a lot of American culture, I would say. However, there was still I still noticed a big gap between me and, let's say, born and bred American Jewry. Yeah, so that was a real shock to me when I was there. Luke is listening now. Luke, we were talking about you. We were praising your name, but you weren't here. And you missed Paul. And you missed Chad. Maybe next time, spend your time sanding floors and join. I don't know if people know this, but Luke, first of all, he has this amazing, I don't know if he wants to share it or if he has shared in the past, but he has this amazing concept called technobabble. He even mentions the Transformers in there, I think. It was a very interesting read. But in general, Luke has also a tremendous amount of insight and I don't know, this amazing flow of words that come out that if you look at one particular word, sometimes it sounds made up. But then you realize it's a beautiful symphony of sorts. So also, I recommend when he comments, which is far and few between, take a look. Yeah. So, yeah, Grim. Paintball for Jesus. Should be the name of a band. Someone I mentioned, I think Grim and I were talking about the Red Heifer, and one of his comments there was someone should name a band the Red Heifer. So there is a band in Israel named the Red Heifer. But it's also probably a name of a bar. The bar is a good name. Like the Red Heifer is a good bar name as well. All right, kids. I think I am going to boogie. Yeah. But Luke, maybe we could have a conversation one time. I know you want to go personal. So I'm thinking about how we could have a conversation people would be interested in as well. That's talking about something personal. So think about that. But I would love to have it specifically with you. Peace.